Becky, can you tell me if we are ready to go on City 7?
Steve, are we ready to go on City 7?
Steve, are we ready to go on? Thank you. Then I will call the meeting to order. This is the council study session for May 11th, 2020. Before we begin with our one presentation this evening, which is the city manager's presentation on the proposed budget, I would just like to acknowledge the great loss that we have suffered in our city with the death of our firefighter, David Jamison, and ask you to join with me in a moment of silence for firefighter Jamison and his family. Thank you very much. Mr. City Manager, I will turn it over to you for the presentation of the budget.
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'll go ahead and get this presentation pulled up and get us underway. So obviously a little different format this year, but nevertheless a very important objective that we do each and every year. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Okay. So as I mentioned, in accordance with Section 8.2 of the City Charter, it's my pleasure to present the Mayor and City Council with our proposed budget 2020 and ending June 30th of 2021. Each and every year for the last several years, our budget has been guided and framed by our 5-year strategic plan, Independence for All. And this plan continues to be our guiding light. And I'm pleased to report to the council tonight that we are well into this plan, having now accomplished 60% of the strategies that were identified and adopted by the City Council with our broad citizen and community input.
I'm sorry, here. I've lost Zach.
Can you hear me okay?
Now I can. Thank you, Zach.
Okay, very good. And while the strategic plan really does remain our guiding light, there's been a number of important items that this council has worked through the last several years. Long-term legacy issues like health insurance for our workforce, our retiree health insurance program, and by no means did any of those solve our budget woes, but they really began to institute the financial sustainability that this council has made a top priority. So this slide, what I really want to highlight for the council tonight is that heading into the budget process this year, our debates were centered less around what service reductions or budget cuts were going to be needed to balance the budget, and more about with the limited resources we had, what were some of our key strategic priorities that we could begin to either reintroduce or enhance into our budget. So things like reinstating our code enforcement budget to levels that were previously established before some budgetary reductions, tackling some of our strategic goals like a housing study, things of that nature. These were really the discussions that I was having with the leadership team through the COVID-19 pandemic. But as we all know, beginning March the 12th, Mayor Weir responded quickly and declared a state of emergency in response to the widening spread of the deadly COVID-19 virus. And the virus does continue to remain a very real part of our everyday lives. And this gives you just a very broad flavor of what has been a blur over the last 30 to 45 days. Nationwide, the United States now has close to 1.4 million cases, over 80,000 deaths now in our country. As a result of this, as you can tell, a containment strategy was deployed aimed at slowing the spread of the virus in our community, across our region and state, and nationwide. Those strategies were certainly necessary to help prevent the spread of the virus, but they have had a devastating impact on the economic position globally, nationally, and here locally. And just to give you a very quick flavor of what I mean by that, globally, we've seen about a $4 trillion loss in gross domestic product, which is a measure of economic output of goods and services. Here in our country, the American gross domestic product has plunged 40%. These are numbers, quite frankly, that have not been realized since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The most recent jobs report, which came out, it was forecasting a unemployment rate of about 20%. It was only 14.7%, but that number since February has grown from 3.5% to now 14.7%. So we're just seeing a remarkable and devastating drop in our economic activity here in this country. So containment strategies aimed at slowing the spread of the virus, but certainly having that devastating impact on our public economic well-being. And locally, obviously, with our sales tax revenue being such a vital part of our budget, that's having a noticeable and devastating impact as well. Through the remainder of our current fiscal year and looking into next fiscal year, we're forecasting a revenue loss from sales tax of about 21%. And so you can tell that's about $8.4 million this year and another $3.4 million next year, or about $11.8 million citywide that we're trying to navigate. And this is really focused largely around the loss in sales tax revenue, but we are certainly monitoring and closely watching the impact that this has on activities like building permits, business licenses, our municipal court revenues, our utility billing revenues. There's a lot of areas that are vulnerable and susceptible to loss as a result of the containment strategy. But I will also remind the council that the COVID-19 pandemic is not the sole source or even the origination of this economic slide. We've talked a lot over the last several budget cycles and fiscal years about the migration away from the brick and mortar retail sales and noticing the precipitous slide in those revenues. So the COVID-19 pandemic has only served to exacerbate and heighten the decline in brick and mortar retail sales as a city revenue source. It cannot be identified or blamed as the sole causation of that. But you can certainly tell the picture that's happening. So within the current fiscal year, which will then transition into tonight's presentation, we talked a lot about the loss specifically to the general fund, which is our most diverse funding source. We're estimating a loss there of about $4.6 million, which would pull our fund balance down to 2% if nothing else were done. However, we've worked with our departments to freeze hiring, freeze spending, delay some projects, which generated savings of about $500,000 in the remaining 90 days of the fiscal year since the pandemic hit. And then with the council approved interfund loan, it'll be our intention to request a drawdown of that of about $2 million, which would end our fund balance at 5% for the fiscal year that would end June 30th, 2020. So I want to talk for just a minute about then what we're building this budget around in terms of a recovery forecast, because it will be a matter of the timing of this recovery of when we can begin to see our budget picture begin to stabilize again. 12:01 a.m. this morning was the expiration of the Jackson County stay-at-home order, which Independence is following. That is a phased reopening plan. As of today, the county has only released the first phase. They anticipate 2 to 3 weeks between each phase. They have hinted at this being a 4-phased approach, so we certainly don't have that final reopening plan in its entirety. So using that as somewhat of a benchmark, we can expect an 8 to 12-week timeline in the best case of when we would see all of our business activities fully resuming, which would carry us somewhere into mid-July or mid-August, which would still be in the first quarter of the fiscal year. But another key factor there is going to be consumer confidence. How soon do our residents feel safe beginning to circulate in our shops, dine in our restaurants, stay in our hotels, and how soon do our businesses feel safe and prepared to accommodate an influx of customers into their businesses? There is a measure that is called the Consumer Confidence Index, and that is put out by a group in this country called the Conference Board. And that group measures consumer confidence, how likely are folks going to be to go out and spend money in the local economy. What we know about that number right now is that from March to April, it drops from 118 points to 86 points, which is the largest drop on record in the 53 years that the Conference Board has been measuring consumer confidence. And by all indications, public health officials continue to warn an inevitable increase in cases again in the fall. We still don't have the widespread testing, contact tracing, or an immunization. And those are all factors that seem to indicate public perceptions of how safe and how likely folks are to get out spending again. So that is to say that while we anticipate a fall recovery in the budget that you'll be presented with tonight, I think that should be viewed and looked at as our best case scenario moving forward. So talking tonight then about how did we develop this budget? Certainly, again, the bedrock will always be and has always been independence for all. But this year, with the pandemic, we also had to bring in some other considerations as well. And there are 7 of those that we used to put our budget together. We talked about wanting to make sure that we made strategic use of the interfund loan that the council approved. Council's authorized, of course, up to $25 million, which is a very bold leadership move by the council. But we as staff are recommending that that be balanced against the recognition that a loan must be repaid and repaid with interest, and balancing the long-term debt, just as if the city were an individual, that would be like a credit card, and knowing that, spending on that credit card and building up debt, eventually those have to be repaid. So finding that balancing act was one of our key principles. Maintaining our police and fire services. These are obviously on the front lines of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we built a budget, even though those are 2 very significant expenditures, our budget recommendation leaves those intact at this time. Really trying to recognize that the virus is temporary, but the long-term ramifications are uncertain. Eventually there will be all those things that I mentioned are absent now: testing, tracing, immunization. But what will be the long-term economic impact? Which businesses will forever be closed? What will be the change in how we as consumers interact with those businesses, how we operate in the workplace, et cetera. So recognizing that there's some uncertainty there. Also on the flip side, treating this as an opportunity for innovation. Paraphrasing President Lincoln, the dogmas of our past are insufficient to deal with our current situation. So knowing that we need to find ways to get more cost-effective and efficient in our service delivery at City Hall, that was a priority. Using data to make these reductions targeted and strategic, so trying to take emotion or bias out of the process, and instead, looking at return on investment, cost, benefit, et cetera, to make data-driven decisions. Continuing to identify those cost-saving measures. Where can we get more lean? Where can we get more nimble? And then building that long-term financial sustainability. The council has adopted a financial policy that says our general fund should have a 16% reserve at minimum. As you can see right now, we are estimating ending fund balance this year at 5%, which is well below that 16% minimum. So the budget was built in mind with trying to take significant strides towards getting to that minimum reserve amounts established by the council. So now it's my pleasure to really get into the mechanics of the proposed budget for you this evening. The proposed budget this year totals just over $311 million. That is a 2% decrease over last year's adopted budget, or a reduction of about $5.1 million. Primarily, that can be attributed to 3 places. Reductions in the general fund, which you'll see here in a moment, reductions in our sales tax funds, and then reductions in the Independence Power and Light Electric Utility Fund as a result of both the 6% rate reduction adopted by council and the Blue Valley power plant shutdown, which will become effective June the 1st. A couple of budget pressures before I get into the mechanics of the budget. Regardless of fund, these are some key issues that are causing constraints and fiscal pain. Workers' compensation and risk management continue to be programs that are heavily utilized in our city. And just like your personal auto or home insurance, the more you use it, the more you're going to see those rates go up. And that is exactly what is happening with both our workers' compensation and risk management. Claims continue to escalate, and therefore costs associated with those continue to rise. ERP is a fancy bureaucratic term for our Munis implementation, which is our financial and human resources management system. That was done as a long-term payback system. So, and then the ongoing upgrades, so we don't fall behind on further upgrades to the software. So about 1.4 million across the utilities and general funds. Loggers is our city employee retirement system. That is a statewide consortium. As you can tell, there's a 1% increase in there. So for our general municipal employees, that is now 19% of our payroll, just shy of 20% for fire, and a little over 20% for police personnel. Of course, even prior to COVID-19, as I mentioned, we were projecting flat sales tax growth, and this has only exacerbated that challenge. And with that challenge in mind, now projecting a $3.4 million loss in sales tax revenue as a result of the pandemic. Specifically to the general fund this year is $72.8 million. Significant decrease there, as you can tell, and we'll get into those mechanics right now. The budget pressures that we were estimating here total about $2.8 million. Most of that can be attributed to the loss in sales tax revenue. On the previous chart, I showed you that the general fund was forecast to have a loss in the upcoming fiscal year of $2 million. Prior to the pandemic, we were forecasting a budget shortfall of about $750,000. And to put that in perspective, though, last several years, the council's been faced with a budget shortfall in the general fund of about $3 to $4 million. So $750,000 was significantly better compared to prior years, and that can be attributed to the generational decisions that have been made the last several years, again, particularly around our insurance benefits. The budget proposes in the general fund cutting about $4.3 million, which would leave a contingency of $1.5 million. In the best case scenario, and recognizing that a budget is just a plan, that would leave a cushion of $1.5 million against further erosion should the pandemic continue to have economic impacts past the fall. If the economy just snaps back and by the first quarter of the new fiscal year, things have resumed normal, that $1.5 million could be added to fund balance, which you'll see later the impact that would have. But there's a two-pronged strategy with those reductions in mind. This slide is an earlier one that shows you one of our first strategies with the budget was to take all new service level requests off the table with one exception. That one exception being increases for public safety overtime and minimum staffing in the fire department. Historically, these have been underfunded and they've required us to make maneuvers during the fiscal year like spending freezes, hiring freezes, other budget reductions, delaying or deferring equipment purchases or capital projects. These are known costs in our budget, and these have caused structural imbalance in years past. I'm pleased to report to the council tonight that these are now budgeted at historic levels, and as long as we continue as management to manage to the budget and manage this rigorously and with great oversight, those maneuvers of the past will not be necessary as a result of our liabilities associated with overtime and minimum staffing. But you can tell that many of our other new initiatives are now stripped out of the budget, which was our very first decision of how we were going to attack the pandemic fallout. This chart gives you a little bit of a summary by department of where the targeted reductions have been made. The largest being in a category called Other. But I will tell you that that is a product of our risk management increases that were put into the budget, the workers' compensation increases put into the budget, and the across-the-board wage increases for our general fund personnel, except where those have previously been negotiated. The next slide, though, gives you a little bit better representation of where some of these reductions have come categorically. And I'll give you a quick flavor of those. Last week, I announced the reorganization of our Public Works Department and our Water Pollution Control Department into the reunification that existed up until the 1980s into what we are now calling our Municipal Services Department. This is a service level change that we have noticed occurring in many of our peer organizations across the country. I believe it delivers upon the objectives of independence for all by being both financially sustainable and financially sustainable and customer oriented, I should say. Part of that reorganization involves transferring engineering services into community development for a one-stop shop for our development community, which I know has been a long-standing concern of the council with the disjointed and often unpredictable development process. This current fiscal year, we estimate those changes in sum will save the city about $300,000 and will grow in future years as additional savings are identified. Across the board, the budget identified a reduction of 12 filled positions and 2 vacant positions. And so the cost savings there totals about 16%. Cost allocations, this would refer to where eligible, charging personnel costs against grant funds or against sales tax funds. That does provide relief to the general fund. The trade-off being, though, that is less dollars for actual service delivery out into the community. Finally, a big ticket item that's been proposed in this year's budget is a reduction of our fixed route transit system. And I'm going to transition to this slide here for this conversation. What we are proposing in the budget is the elimination of the fixed route Indibus system. This would preserve the intercity service between Kansas City, Missouri and Independence, and would also preserve the paratransit service that is provided for our elderly and disabled population. This proposal certainly wasn't arrived at lightly, and as I mentioned earlier, all of our recommendations are based on data, and that's what we are reflecting in this chart here. Over the last 3 years, the cost of operating this service have increased steadily, while the revenue from this has declined. Ridership has declined over the last several years, while our FTA, which is our Federal Transit Authority funding, has not kept pace with the increased cost of providing this service. So where costs have increased 8.8% over the last 3 years, revenues have declined by 2.4%, which means the general fund subsidy over the last 3 years has increased 15.5%. That said, we recognize the critical service that transit provides. And between now and when the council votes on the budget on June 15th, I know my staff, myself, and our elected officials will be working aggressively to try to identify solutions, whether those be modified services or revenues to help support this in a sustainable, ongoing manner. We're having constant conversations with our partners at KCATA about both of those, both about alternative service deliveries as well as revenues to help support this on an ongoing basis. There is a committee meeting this Wednesday of the Council's Transit Advisory Committee where this will be discussed more in depth, and certainly public comment being a critical part of that. But I do want to affirm for the Council 2 things. Again, this is a data-driven decision that was not arrived at lightly, and we're picking among many bad options at this point, but that we are working aggressively to try to identify solutions to this necessary and important service. Okay, transitioning on, this budget does create propose, I should say, creation of the Health and Recreation Levy. This has been a revenue source for the city for decades, but has historically been recorded as a revenue into the general fund. The levy itself generates about $2.6 million annually, and as the name indicates, has been approved to support health and recreation activities. Each year, though, there are many competing demands in the general fund for our scarce resources, and as that demand grows, slices of the pie seem to grow smaller and smaller. So we want to make sure that these resources that are dedicated specifically for this use, but for better transparency and accountability, are pulled out. So we are proposing creation of this fund to support these 2 services. Our proposal this year would have those revenues going exactly like they have on a pro rata basis, about 68% or 1.8 million for recreation services and 832,000 or 32% to support animal services. Our sales tax funds, these are our voter approved funds, sales tax funds, and we have 5 of those. They are wholly and entirely reliant on revenues from retail sales at brick and mortar establishments. And both because of the continued rise in online sales and the pandemic, the effects here have been particularly devastating. So I want to highlight tonight some of the ways in which these sales taxes are adapting to that fallout. Police sales tax will plan to purchase less uniforms, equipment, and vehicles in the coming fiscal year. Fire sales tax, where they had planned the purchase of an aerial apparatus, they will plan to lease that asset instead. The park sales tax, previously announced that we will not be opening our Adventure Oasis water park this season, and will also be delaying many critical capital projects. The street sales tax, this one is seeing the largest financial hit because it is the largest with its half-cent sales tax, a loss of about $3.8 million. So we are reducing capital project funding by that amount while also reducing our operating budgets and the equipment that we would be purchasing. The stormwater sales tax similarly will be delaying capital projects and will also decrease its budget for making emergency repairs in the coming fiscal year. And finally, our transient guest tax, which is collected at our lodging establishment, will be delaying capital projects at some of our beloved tourism sites like the Frontier Trails Museum and our historic homes, Bingham, Wagner, Vale, etc. But on the other side of the coin, this is the first year where our budget will recognize the voter-approved use tax, or Proposition P, which was approved by our voters last fall. The budget itself is estimating annual revenue of $1.5 million. I will tell the council that while the sample size is small, we did get additional remittance today, which reflect our March collections. And if annualized, right now, that would trend closer to about $2.3 million in annual collections. But the budget is based on the more conservative $1.5 million number right now. That was the data that we had at the time this was put together. And again, that tax has been split for 2 purposes. One, to support animal shelter operations. So those costs will be used for personnel totaling 15.3 FTE, while also supporting shelter supplies, operations, etc. The other half of that tax is to hire new officers and their associated equipment. And in this budget year, we are planning for the creation of and hiring 4 new police officers, 2 sergeants, and their vehicles and supplies. Quickly, I'd like to talk to the council about our 3 utility funds. Power and light, you can tell that this has a decreased budget this year, again, because of the 6% rate reduction, but also the decrease in staffing, 29 FTE reduction here. That can largely be attributed to the shutdown and closure of the Blue Valley Power Plant. So we continue to meet the council's objective of getting more lean and more efficient and operating like a business at the electric utility. We're also meeting the 90-day unassigned fund balance requirement there as well. Water department, no change in their FTE, a slight reduction in their overall budget total. The capital budget there totals $4.2 million, largely aimed at the ongoing main replacement program. Because of some of the stagnating conversation around the AMI, or automatic meter reading program, the budget right now does envision resumption of the 15-year meter replacement program. These are newer digital meters that in the future, if the council were to contemplate movement towards AMI, could be utilized for that purpose, though they are not being activated for that at this time. It'd be like buying a car but not putting gas in it. So these are digital rather than analog meters. They don't transmit. We'll still have our meter readers, but this does keep us up on our meter replacement best practices. And finally, water pollution control. Again, this is being merged into Public Works to create the Municipal Services Department. The overall reduction in staffing there is 5.5 FTE. We have one major expenditure I wanted to highlight there, which is the purchase of a TV truck, which allows us to do critical inspections of our stormwater and sewer infrastructure so that we can do preventative and ongoing maintenance as well. So as I wrap up tonight, just looking ahead, some critical issues that I believe need to be on the council's radar as we collaborate over the next fiscal year. Technology upgrades and cybersecurity are a critical issue. Obviously, as a city, we possess a tremendous amount of data, whether those be business license records, our customers' utility billing records, all sorts of important data. We've seen a rise in online attacks from hackers who compromise that data and can create a tremendous amount of disruption to cities. We need to be talking about making the necessary investments to protect that data, to stay ahead of these very sophisticated hacking practices. Other items to review are city employees' accrued leave payouts. As of today, at the time an employee separates from service with the city, that employee can be paid out up to 1,040 hours of sick leave, 400 hours of vacation leave, and 60 hours of personal business leave at their current hourly rate at the time of separation. Just in the last 18 months, if you look at employees who have received a payout just among those who are retiring from city service, that totals $2.5 million citywide in the last 18 months. So this is a significant financial liability to the city, often prevents us from doing a quick hiring process once an employee leaves or retires from service because we have to finish the payout. So that's a critical issue to discuss. We have made significant strides with our health insurance program. It's my belief the next frontier is to collaborate with our Stay Well Advisory Committee on implementing a robust wellness program. So incentivizing healthy behaviors and healthy practices that help our workforce avoid chronic illness and disease that would require ongoing medical treatment, physician's assistance, medication, et cetera. Those are all costs that could be avoided through healthy practices. So finding ways to incent that behavior would be a goal of ours in the next year. I do want to report to the council as part of our strategic plan. We believe very soon we'll be able to unveil for you a 5-year financial tool that will allow us to do modeling and better predictive analytics. And some of the items that we need to pay attention to, particularly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, our pension contributions. Again, our statewide consortium that we are a part of relies heavily on stock market investments, and with the volatility that has been seen there, it's widely believed that additional contributions are going to be necessitated to make up for losses from the volatility in the stock market. Our health insurance premiums are very likely to increase. Health insurance is a very expensive program generally, but particularly because of the worldwide strain from the pandemic, it's believed that every institution, public and private, is going to see an increase in their premiums over the next several years. And then our economic incentive debt, these are largely economic projects, development projects that benefit and rely upon sales tax activity. With the closure or disruption in businesses, we expect that activity to have been greatly altered and reduced. And so it's believed that some of those debt service liabilities could potentially be more severe in future years. So with that, Madam Mayor and members of the council, it's been my pleasure to work with our leadership team in developing this budget and submit it for your consideration, and look forward to working with you over the next 45 days or so leading up to its adoption. With that, I will turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. I know that you spend months preparing the budget, and 2 months ago, you were thrown a major curveball and the worst possible time for the budget development. And I just want to express my gratitude to you and your staff for being able to adapt to the situation and present a budget that is balanced. It's certainly not the budget that you wanted to present to us. It's not the one we wanted to get. There's certainly some troubling things contained within it that we need to address in the next 45 days. Chief among those, I think many would agree, is the reduction and elimination of the transit system. We've had several meetings regarding that. The Council Audit and Finance Committee meeting where this budget was previewed, and I feel that I can speak for many people in our community that this is not something that we can afford to let go, especially during these difficult times when people are more than ever reliant on that service. Regardless, the state statute and the city charter need to be met. They have not been relieved of those duties. And I appreciate you bringing to us a balanced budget. Now we have our work cut out for us to identify additional funding or additional reductions to be able to maintain the transit system. And I'm just bringing that forward this evening because I haven't received many calls, which I know all of my colleagues on the council have as well. And I just wanted to express, what the situation is in terms of timing, and that this budget has 45 days for us to work through it to try to address some of these critical issues. I do have just a couple of questions, and then I will open it up to the council, of course, for their comments and questions. Regarding the interfund loan, the $2 million that you are proposing drawing down from that $25 million, understanding that we have no idea of knowing when or how much the economy is going to start to bounce back. Are you anticipating using that $2 million for fund balance so that we can get to the 5%? I think that was the number that you gave us. I just wasn't entirely clear about that.
Certainly, yes. The $2 million that we're proposing would be within the current fiscal year that ends June 30th, 2020, and would be used to cover all of our expenses up through June 30th, because failure to do so would mean a drawdown of fund balance. So this would replenish that and keep that amount at a 5% ending balance.
Okay. So just to recap, we had anticipated going into this budget planning prior to COVID, a $750,000 deficit that we needed to manage around, which was very doable. I don't think I've ever seen a budget that only had a $750,000 shortfall. So now we are staring down a $2.7+ million budget shortfall, and then we are adding about 1.5 million contingency just to cover the unknown. So that's what gets us to approximately the $4 million that we are having to manage through budget cuts. Is that correct?
That's correct. When we presented the first snapshot of this to Audit and Finance back at the 1st of April, we had 3 scenarios. 2 of those have now been rendered obsolete just based on information that we have. And what we were calling our 3rd or worst case scenario is now our best case scenario.
Okay.
So what the 1.5 million would be is giving us some cushion against this worsening further. If it doesn't worsen further, if we are just spot on with our assessment, then it would be our recommendation to put that in fund balance to pull that up to an ending balance in 2021 of 8%.
Okay. And last question. The local use tax which is the only fund that's performing at all. And we saw, I believe our January receipts were around 90,000 and our March receipts were around 290,000. So we've seen a sharp increase and above what we anticipated in the collection of the local use tax. If those numbers continue to trend in that direction or even improve, how do you allocate that additional funding? I mean, if we were to end our year at 2.2 million rather than 1.5, our budget is built on the 1.5. I mean, particularly for the animal shelter is what I'm thinking about, because as I read through the budget, we built the budget on saying we have $1.5 million and this is how we're going to spend it, not, we have, this huge budget and we're going to apply $1.5 million to it. So how would, just if we do better than expected in the use tax, how will those dollars be used in terms of animal services? I mean, police is easy. You just hire more police officers if you have more money or you purchase more equipment. But how does that translate to the animal shelter side of things?
Certainly. So our ballot language approved by the voters allocated $750,000 for the animal shelter operations, and by all accounts, that bucket's going to get filled. We'll be at the 750. So that will allow us to now start more aggressively meeting the next objective, which was the hiring of 30 new police personnel. So every dollar that comes in and above our estimated projection is only going to allow us to move more quickly to meeting that objective that the voters. And once that's done, then we can start waterfalling back to the other sales taxes and general fund as well. So the good news here is it will move us faster through those waterfalls and satisfying those voter approved objectives.
So the overall budget for the animal shelter and animal services is 2.7 million, something like that. So, but the money from Prop P is only for the shelter. It's not for the other animal services. I mean, we can't use it to fund those other services. Is that correct?
You're right.
Okay. That was all I had. So I will turn it over to the council for your comments or questions. I can't see you all, so just speak up. Yes,
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councilwoman DeLucy.
I would just like to touch on a few topics. The first is the bus. It's true that historically we have not used CDBG money to fund the bus, simply because bus is defined as part of public service. And we made a priority decision in years past to fund food, shelter, utility services in public service, and we couldn't go above that 15%. Well, with the $478,000 coming from Washington, that's allowing us to amend our budget from last year, that 15% no longer applies. Therefore, we can use all of the $478,000 to help with the shortfall on our bus service. As I understand the ordinance that we're going to be voting on next week, 75,000 of that 478,000 is to fully fund those public service requests made from last budget year. Therefore, I would not be in favor of disturbing that $75,000 allocation. I will be in favor of using the excess $403,000 to fund the bus. And I know that negotiations are going on with the Transportation Authority, with the state of Missouri, with the county, and all these other things. The problem is this: people make decisions today based on facts as they exist today. I spoke to the butcher at Price Chopper. She lives at the square. She takes the bus, I-70 Noland Road. She told me with tears in her eyes last week, if you take away my bus, you have taken away 2/3 of my city and you've taken me away from the only job I've had stability for. I don't believe that our community can even wait 45 days to get stability in their living situation. To me, transportation is an essential service. We can use that $403,000 to shore up the shortfall of $800,000. I noticed there's $177,000 for the city to spend on memberships and meetings. I think we can use that $177,000 to shore up the bus service. I noticed that practically every department has public meetings and overnight stays. Perhaps if we add those numbers together, we can come up with a little bit more money to fund an essential service our citizens depend on. So that's my first point. My second point is the health and recreation levy is $2.6 million. It is not the animal service and recreation levy. I've spoken with the city manager regarding his relabeling, or our relabeling, I should say, of the health levy. It is a health levy. It is not an animal service levy. I have looked at the animal services budget. That is the only department that's increasing employees. That is the only department that has a new source of funding. I have not seen in that budget what the rent is. What is the payment if we're going to perhaps be purchasing a building? None of that is in that budget. So when we talk about the cost of animal services being 2-point-some million, that is not the full cost of the services. I personally believe that people are more important than animals. We have to take care of our people first. I believe that the health department, when we diffuse the health department across the number of different departments, that was an experiment. We were trying to save money. We thought we could make it work. Well, it didn't. This pandemic has shown me that that was a mistake. We never should have done it. We need to get our health department back in one location. We need to fund it, and we need to establish criteria that the state will accept to start funding our health department again. Therefore, for us to take the health department levy and make it an animal service levy is a very big mistake. The third item I want to talk about is the management analyst position. On page 73 of the proposed budget, it mentions that we are not having any salary or benefit for a management analyst. A management analyst is required under our charter. I think that we need to amend this budget to comply with our charter. And I think we need to use the 2018 number of $92,000 as a salary and a benefit for our management analyst. I've spoken with the city manager, and I would request that some kind of amendment be made for that. Fourth, I do want to ask, and to be sure, that where we talk about we are delaying capital projects, does that mean that the funds are not allocated, or are the funds allocated just not being spent on those projects? So if we did not allocate them, would that money be available for us to use, for example, for the bus service? I want to make sure that we do not use CDBG money for anything, including the Square Street Cage design. I don't believe the Justice Center, we should use COVID-19 money. And I don't know what's going on with the 24 highway mural. I think we've already approved, I think it's $45,000. I don't know. But are we going to pay that or not pay that? I'd like to know.
We are not.
Okay.
That was
wonderful.
reported at the roll committee today.
Okay, we are not spending that? Great. And I don't know if we are looking at leave payout as a discussion for our annual meeting, or if you want to discuss it now, Mr. City Manager. Was that just a teaser to say we have to start thinking about it, or do you want our thoughts now?
No, I'm mostly just saying that I would like to get that on the council's radar as an item that we really need to make a priority sooner rather than later. It represents probably our largest remaining long-term liability. This council's dealt with a lot the last several years in addressing long-term liabilities, and that's probably the largest of the long-term liabilities remaining that give us an opportunity to put that structural balance back into the budget. So not necessarily looking for a dialogue tonight, just telegraphing that that's something we should begin to make a priority.
Okay, okay. I think that's it. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions? Councilman Robertson?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I have several. if I can have just a few minutes. First of all, I wanted to,
I am going to I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I am going to have to leave the meeting at 7. So if, I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm just telling you, Councilman Van Camp, at 7 o'clock, if there's still further discussion, I'm going to turn it over to you to conclude the meeting. Go ahead.
okay. So first of all, I wanted to ask about the cybersecurity that you mentioned earlier. Do we have cybersecurity insurance? Because if there was a major breach, it could cost in the millions of dollars. And I know most of the insurance companies or even other companies sell cyber security insurance, or maybe it's included with some of our existing business insurance now. But I think it's a potential liability for the city if we don't have it.
I will have to speak a little bit more specifically with the finance director. Generally, council member, though, yes, we do have that covered as part of our overall policy, umbrella policy for the city.
I think that should not be a self-insurance thing. I think it should be covered with some of our contracts for our software that we have. We have substantial investments now in new software programs, and we're paying a major fee every year for all of those software upgrades. I think those software companies should step up and cover some of the cybersecurity insurance for us. Number two, I wanted to just comment on the police and pet proposal that was passed for the use tax. Obviously, the amount has increased substantially in the last 3 months. I think a lot of that is a result of COVID-19. More people are ordering from home, ordering on the internet. They don't want to go to the stores if they don't have to. Some of that I think will continue. So I expect, and I had expected before, that it would continue to increase over the first 2 or 3 years of this passing. As we get to the point that we can fund more police officers, one of the cautions that I would suggest is that, yes, we can fully fund the animal shelter with their portion, but when it comes to funding police officers' salaries and benefits, we need to build into that fund a reserve, and it can be overseen by the Safety Sales Tax Committee. But I believe there needs to be a portion of the funds collected that needs to go into a reserve fund to help fund the officers should we have a few months when the use tax goes down. If we have an episode where we don't collect the use tax for a few months, or we see that use tax go up and down, we need a constant fund to be able to fund and hire police officers on an ongoing basis. So we need to level that out, and the only way to do that is with a reserve fund built in for those extra police officers that are hired. So I would suggest that you and Finance Department get together and look at how that could be set up, and those funds from the use tax segregated for only that purpose until 30 officers are hired with a reserve fund. I also noticed on page 20, it talks about the meter replacements for the water department. You mentioned that in your presentation just a little bit ago. I don't see a meter replacement program for IPL. Every electric utility has a meter replacement policy. Kansas City Power and Light replaced all meters in 10 years. Every year they replaced 1/10 of their meters. We have never had, in my memory, a meter replacement policy for electric. We need to have that. A lot of the meters are failing. And because a lot of the mechanical meters are slowly failing over a period of time, we are losing a significant amount of revenue if we don't replace some of the meters that are over 10 or 15 years old. I don't see that any place in the budget. And I would highly recommend IPL look at a replacement policy for the meter over 10 or 15 years, just like water department. At least they're far-sighted enough to be doing that. At the bottom of page 20, it talks about the significant amount, I think you mentioned this also, the significant amount of money that we are spending on sick leave payout, vacation payout, and 60 hours of personal business leave payout. Unbelievable. No company does that. No other city that I know of does that. We cannot financially continue to do that in the future. It will eventually take this city down as more and more people retire. That policy has to change, and it's up to the council. It's up to the council and the city manager to change that policy. In my office, my employees are given sick leave and vacation time every year. If they don't take it by the end of the year, it's paid as a bonus. They start over every single year at zero. No vacation to start the year. They accrue it as the year goes on. That's the way most employers do it nowadays. So unless we get with the times, unless we realize how much this is costing the citizens of Independence and the city's general fund, it's a significant drain on the general fund. I want to go over to page 46. I have a question of the finance administration piece. And in looking at this particular page, I did not understand, so maybe somebody can explain it, but there's a significant increase in salary and benefits with the same 4 FTE positions. In fact, there's a 60% increase in salary and benefits for the same 4 positions over 2 years. 60% increase. I would like to get that. Most of us that work would like to get that. So I'd like an answer as to why there's such a large increase in salary and benefits in the finance administration. I want to go over to the finance administration under law. And again, there's a significant increase in the amount of salary and benefits, and there's a decrease in the number of FTEs from 2 to 1.5. But there's a large increase in the salary and benefits. And then down in the loggers contribution, it looks like the loggers contribution is just a little less than half the salary and benefits paid. Salary for regular employees is $98,900, just under $100,000. The loggers contribution is almost $42,000. That's a lot. That's more than 20%. So I don't understand why those figures are off. I'm just going to go through some of these figures that I caught that I didn't understand, and I don't know if there's anybody from finance on the call, but I just wanted some explanation. Under fire, sales tax program, page 66. Under the salary and benefits line item, the proposed budget, it's more than 2 times what it was the year before, and there's only a half of a FTE added, half-time person added, and the salary and benefits have doubled. Let me just continue going through these questions.
We will probably catalog those for your benefit and summarize that in the memo to the council.
Okay. Going over to 73, Councilmember DeLucy already mentioned this. It's the management analyst position, and it for the adopted budget for 1920 and also for the budget year 2021, there's no line item for the salary and benefits. This is a charter violation because it actually specifies in the charter we have to have a person in that position for the City of Independence. So since there's not one listed for the adopted budget for 19 and 20, and we did have a person in that position, but it was being funded for IPL, I would recommend that we change the line item in the actual budget saying how much that budgeted person made, and then have it listed under transfers from IPL, so that money is transferred into the general fund to fund that position for this year at least. Next year, we need to put a line item amount in there to be consistent with the charter. Page 79, Public Works Administration. So there is a decrease of 2.5 FTEs, but the salary and benefits only went down about $100,000 from $541,000 to $450,000. So about $90,000. The salary and benefits decreased by close to $100,000, but we lost 2.5 full-time equivalent employees. So again, that's a significant change that I don't see how the numbers work out, because this is in administration. So maybe that could be answered as well. Page 83. And this is under WPC administration. And I understand there's been a reorganization, so maybe the answer is someplace in the reorganization, and I just have not understood totally how that's going to occur with the administration portion for WPC. But there's basically the same number of individuals as far as full-time equivalents. But can they administer WPC and public work combined? So we have the same number of administrators, but now they've got added administration of a department that's merged in with theirs. So can they handle that for the same number of people? I guess that's the question.
Yeah. I can answer that one tonight. Yeah.
Okay. You want me to stop there while you answer it?
No, I would just say that the reorganization is intended to remove duplication of services, and I think our span of control will certainly be effective in making sure that the services continue or improve without the citizens noticing any disruption. In fact, I think they'll probably see enhancement of service delivery. So I feel very, very confident that our reorganization will provide the necessary level of oversight to be effective, council member.
Okay.
You bet.
Can I go on with a few more? Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, page 88. At the bottom, there's a line item detail about the expenditures for the Little Blue Valley Sewer District, and it's the intermunicipal agreements of $7,940,000. So my question is this the line item for the principal and interest on bonds for the Little Blue Sewer District upgrades that we had to vote on and that were mandated by the federal government?
In part, yes. It's also part of our, operating agreement. So it's all of that together. It's
Okay.
The bonds, it's the increases, it's the operating agreement for the territory that's serviced by that district. So that's the entirety of the operating costs with the sewer district.
Okay. Well, the explanation is helpful because I have, and I'm sure many of the council members have had phone calls asking why their sewer bill was so high when their water bill went down. And I've told them that partly it's payment on a bond issue that was federally mandated to upgrade equipment for the Little Blue Sewer District. So I think that would be helpful publicly to explain, why those payments are so much, and that we're paying on bonds, and that we're part of a larger Little Blue Sewer District, not just for the City of Independence, but it's for the larger sewer districts. So I think that would be helpful to explain.
Very good.
I'm just about there. Let me get to my last questions, and I think they're at the end here. I'm going to skip over to those. So on page 186. This is the comparison of revenues, expenditures, and change in available resources for IPL. And I just wanted to note that the 2019-20 adopted budget was $5,200,000 in the red, and the proposed 2020-21 budget is $2,365,000 in the red. So with the trend with revenues for IPL, which is flat or decreasing, and it shows it here, long term, so there's a decreasing or flat revenue stream for IPL, and expenditures are locked in because of this debt service for IPL. The bottom line is we're in the red and we cannot continue to borrow to service the debt for IPL. Even though we have reserves right now, those reserves will continue to be lost over time. And once they get below 90 days, and that's mandated by the council, then the council will have to look at a rate increase. And so I know we're trying to cut expenses out there, and we have cut a lot of expenses, but I would sure like the council to tighten their belt, because just like the Burns and Mack study suggested, over the next 4 to 5 years, you may have to look at a substantial rate increase for Independence Power and Light if this trend continues. So it's good to look at the numbers. Right now, it's a 2-year trend. If we continue to see a 3rd, 4th, 5th year trend, then you're going to have to make a decision. The same is true on the next page, 187. This is the Sanitary Sewer Enterprise Fund. And these are the two funds. These are the two that are in the red for ending this year and projected for next year. Both are in the red. Both have a deficit. Next year for the sewer fund is $2,156,000. So just like IPL, we already, are paying significantly high rates for the sewer, and now it's for the debt service. And without that income stabilizing the debt service, there's going to have to be something that's going to have to be done as far as the rates. So those two things I'd like the council to keep an eye on, because those are significant trends for 2 years, this year and next year, that we're going to see deficits. The last thing I wanted to ask about is about the lobbyists, and if we still are hiring 2 lobbyists for next year. I didn't plan on being on the council at this point, but since I am, I want to talk about the lobbyists for a few minutes. Do we still have 2 lobbyists in the budget for next year? And if we do, why on earth do we? When we're cutting everything else, we need to go down to 1 lobbyist. And I would highly recommend, after you show me where the lobbyist fees and whether they are in the budget, because I couldn't find them, I would highly recommend that we delete the contract with Tilly and go to just Barget as our only lobbyist. Tilly has not really accomplished anything for us, especially for all the money that we paid him. And I would like us to recommend, and I will do it in a council meeting, that we terminate his contract. Can you tell me where it's budgeted, or can the finance department?
On page 31 of our proposed budget, that is Office of the City Manager. You'll see a line item for professional services for $30,000. And there's an asterisk that says lobbying services. That is the portion that is for the Barget and Associates contract, because they were contracted to provide general municipal lobbying services. The remainder of that contract, as well as the strategic capital contract, is budgeted throughout the 3 utilities. And Councilman, I don't have a page number on me right now. I left that note, but I'll get that for the council. But those the remainder of that contract, as well as the full balance for the strategic capital, are spread out across the 3 utilities in professional services. And I'll get those cost centers and page numbers for you as well. But hopefully that starts to give you a little detail. Those contracts, those current agreements, are current through August of this year, I believe, is the exact date. So that's why we had to put at least a portion of there. And then that being a policy decision of council, we carried the status quo forward. But as you said, council will need to decide then if they want to re-up that. And if they choose to re-up only one or neither of the 2 contracts, then those balances would fall back to the fund balances where they're budgeted at.
The concern I have with cutting the bus service is we are affecting people's lives and jobs and least affected, least have the money or can afford to get around town to jobs, to medical appointments, to shop for groceries. Those are the people that really need the public service. And I'd like to just comment on the money from the CDBG grant money. I and Mayor Weir, and I believe, John, it was you, was on the call with Congressman Cleaver when he called to announce, was it you, John? There was another councilman on that call. Anyway.
It was me. It was DeLucci.
Oh, DeLucci, okay. Anyway, I was on that call and I heard what Congressman Cleaver said. Basically, he told us that he wanted that money to go out to the people that needed it most, and that this extra money would have no real strings attached like the regular CBDG do. In other words, it could be spent with a little more freedom for especially those that needed food or lodging or utilities or transportation. I specifically asked him about a few things that it could be used for. And he said, yes, all of that. He said, that's what Congress wants it used for. And that's why they didn't attach the strings. And so I would like a significant amount of that money to go to the people that need it most. I know there's a portion of it that we've talked or a group has talked about loans. There's a number of places you can go to get small business loan. We don't need to be a third or fourth entity that handle loans, and there's always administrative costs that are going to be used for companies to administer it. Let's don't do that. Let's give it to the people that need it most in the form of transportation, for the bus service, for the soup kitchens, for utility, for rent money, for places that have canned goods and food to give out. Those are the people that need it right now in this situation at this time, and this is why the money was given to us to use by the federal government. So I'm going to talk about that at the Transportation Committee meeting when we have it on Wednesday, and that's the last I'll say. So I will turn my speaker off. Somebody else can ask questions.
City Manager?
Yes, sir.
I guess I can be next. I'm not sure. Well, about this bus service too. I think we need to figure out something different. Some of the people really in the need. I realize the thing's so incomplete on some of the questions that Councilwoman DeLucci asked, and I realize that you don't track every little thing, but I realize the numbers have dropped, but people really need that service. I mean, Kansas City's doing it for free. We're still charging in the middle of this. I don't know how they stand on it now, but I really believe that, really need to figure out something else. Something else on the capital projects. I was reading through here, seeing what a water company or one of them had College Street on here. Iron Light did not. I hate incomplete things. I don't know if they just missed it. These things like that need to be kind of line items so somebody can really go through this thing. Because I don't think we're doing that for free at Power and Light. Also, the Square project, I'm kind of concerned about what's going on up there. I've seen it was up there couple days ago and seen some surveyors out there and stuff. If we're going to put stuff on hold, we probably need to hold it down. But my biggest concern, are we going to do like on this budget, we're going to do like quarterlies or anything like that on spending, or, you know, things lighten up, or, you know, what's your ideas on that, is, you know, on this essential spending and stuff? Are we going to do like quarterlies on that on this budget?
At our last audit and finance, or the council's last audit and finance committee meeting, that committee decided that they were going to go ahead and hold monthly committee meetings to review the finances each month. And then I would go ahead and submit to the council tonight that, given the uncertainty of this year, if the position continues to be very fluid and volatile, it will probably be necessary to do budget amendments throughout the year, probably at least on a quarterly basis, to adjust on the fly. But I know that the council committee did make that decision to go to monthly meetings to do precisely what you're referencing, which are those more detailed scrutinous looks at the monthly financial reports.
Yeah. Hey, also, I noticed through this, and Councilman DeLucci also pointed out, I see a lot of meetings and overnight stay. I mean, I'm looking at throughout, and I realize we want to be on top of things. We have to go to meetings and stuff, but it's all virtual stuff, you know, and stuff like that. But, you know, you can not, I'm counting the enterprise funds and everything, but if the general fund people are going to take cuts, so should the enterprise people, as far as that goes. And there's like $500,000 sitting there in that, along with one other one I got was the computer maintenance. I seen a lot of it spread out amongst the department. I realize you have to maintain it, and the cyber thing is very important. It just seemed like an extreme amount of money going out the door when we have computer people there that we're paying. I think that one guy makes over $100,000 there running that or whatever. But, you know, I think we have the computer, should have the expertise there. I mean, I realize they can't do everything, but I mean, I looked at my numbers might be a little bit messed up here, but it was 750,000 or something like that across the board for computer maintenance, and I'm sure that has to do with programming and stuff like that. So just something that kind of popped up. One other thing, I'm still wondering about the impact of Bass Pro, because it was looking good until after this, and so I'm sure we're going to have something to have to cover up there. One thing. Number two, or another thing was this $2 million that you're going to borrow. I might have missed it, but I didn't see it as a line item in this budget. It sounds like it's pretty certain. We
have it plugged in there. Our estimate is for $450,000 a year for the next 5 years to do the debt service repayment.
Okay. One other, well, a couple things. Those on the sick leave policy that Councilman Robertson brought up. I realize that there's probably very, very few companies that actually do that anymore. But there's a lot of companies out there that doesn't run a 24-hour operation. It's kind of hard for city manager to separate what happens in like Power and Light. That's the one I'm familiar with. When a person calls in sick, and I understand you get to 12 days a year or whatever, and if they don't use it, they lose it. But when you're trying to put in power for somebody and you make, you tell somebody, hey, Walmart, I'm going to be there tomorrow. We have 3 of them call in. It's pretty rough out there. And then on the 24-hour operation, you're paying time and a half to another person. But I do understand, and I've talked to the city manager about this, a way to trying to accomplish that. And it is unusual, I agree. But planning at a Power and Light's a little different than an office worker or something like that. And as far as the pension, I want to go over that a little bit. As far as the pension, you know, there is a downslide on this, but on the other hand, when it was going good, we didn't pay anything. Now things are bad. Now we're going to have to pay. So instead of saving that money and looking down the road, it's been so good so long. Well, that's with everything in this world. I mean, everybody's been rolling and rolling, and all of a sudden there we've come to an instant stop, and I understand all that. But as far as a pension, that really needs to be as part of your hiring tools to get people here. I mean, you can only cut so much, but anyway, other than that, I didn't see too many other things other than I do think the capital projects should be frozen. I noticed in the budget that another thing Councilman Robertson brought up about how much these enterprise funds are losing. But if you look at their capital budgets out there, they went from 1 million to 5 million. They did that. Water company, everybody else. I mean, water company's looking good, but they also, if you look at their budget, they have increased capital spending for this next year. Unreal. It's 4 times than it was last year. That's kind of deceiving when we talk about reserves and stuff like that, and you're spending the money. And I realize that we have to keep that infrastructure up, or we're gonna be in trouble one day. But I know as far as the power and light one, it went from, I think it was 1.5 to 5.8 or something $1 million for capital improvements. So, other than that, I don't have anything else. I appreciate your efforts, city manager, and your staff. I think it's well put together. It's pretty tough to go through there. I mean, it'd have to be fill my table up if you had to put everything on there. I realize that. So I am impressed with what you put out there, and thank you.
Thank you. And I know there's a tremendous amount of questions, and we're over here texting with each other, making sure we catalog all these and capture them, and we're going to get all these answered back for the council. So thank you all for your level of attention on this.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I did have one more question.
If I could, Mr. Perkins, did you want in here? You haven't had your turn.
Go ahead.
I just wondered, Mr. City Manager, could you put the lobbyist's salary through August? And then when we see what we're doing in July and August, we can do a budget amendment if necessary. Is that possible, or do you never? I understand you have to submit a balanced budget, and that's what I'm trying to get to. But I think $240,000 for lobbyists is too much. So if we can just put it through August, that satisfies our required contractual obligation and allows us the luxury of time to look to see where we are, if it's possible. That's all.
Yeah, and I mean,
suggestion.
It sounds like the council is going to want to have that conversation. And it's just really a matter of timing. You can have it now as part of the submitted budget and amend the budget to pay, one or both of them just through August, or you can have that budget amendment during the current fiscal, or pardon me, once you get into the new fiscal year and amend the budget at that time. So you got options there, you got plays, and it's just a matter of timing of how and when you want to amend the budget to reflect the outcome that the council settles on there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Mr. Perkins.
You're welcome. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. So the hot topic is the transit, and that's something that the Audit and Finance Committee was looking at, and the reductions that we had there. That we started reviewing that about 2 weeks or so ago now. I've had conversations, I know the city manager has, the mayor has, with Robbie McIntyre with the KCATA Area Transit Authority, talking about trying to shore up those funds and stuff. And I would encourage my other Audit and Finance Committee members to reach out to them if you haven't. I mean, I think it's very much in your purview to reach out to Robbie and talk to him and express those concerns, because this is a larger conversation that we need to have for sure. And if you haven't, please do so. That's part of our jobs to do that. And being the chairwoman of the committee, Councilwoman DeLucia, I think you should probably reach out and express that to him as well, that we can use some of those fundings that he's receiving from the CARES Act too, so we can use and maximize as much financing that we can possibly have on that. So I've received several calls too, and this is a big concern, but let's exhaust all the avenues that we can to try to reach these goals that we need. So Mr. City Manager, on page 12, talking about how we traditionally fund our municipal government with retail sales. That's obviously been taking a hit. So the discussion and the thoughts that I've had is, how do we pass legislation? How do we move legislation through Jeff City? The Wayfair legislation, which my understanding, there's a Senate committee going on right now discussing that. So tied that into our lobbyists and our team in Jeff City with our representatives. How do we move this legislation and really push this through the legislation in Jeff City so we can start capturing that Wayfair, or start capturing the full internet sales tax? And perhaps you might want to set the table, Mr. City Manager, explain what the Wayfair legislation is.
Certainly. So the voters who were involved with the Prop P last November, they'll recall that was an online sales tax, but it's a little more complicated than that. The only authority that our state has right now is to tax online sales when that purchase is made from a business that has a physical presence in the state of Missouri. Okay, so if you're shopping at home and you buy something from Target, you're probably going to pay that sales tax because there's a physical Target in just about every city in Missouri. If you buy something from your sister's, doll boutique company in Washington State, you're not going to pay that because that is a business that is located outside the state of Missouri. Wayfair is the name of a company. I believe they sell furniture, or home goods, something like that. There was a Supreme Court case a few years ago that allowed states, if they enabled legislation, to tax those online sales when they are made from a business outside of your own state. So in this case, if our state legislature were to adopt what's commonly referred to as the Wayfair legislation, then all municipalities in the state would then have that authority to tax, where their use tax has been approved. Let me add that caveat. Where a use tax has been approved, you could tax both purchases in your state and outside of your state. So if you're in Independence, if you buy from that Washington State business, then that use tax would be assessed as well. There's a tremendous amount of sales that occur from businesses. I mean, we are a global economy now. So, probably see stuff that comes internationally. So there's a tremendous, even though those Amazon and UPS and U.S. Postal Service trucks drive up and down the road, they don't always get that tax assessed to them if they're coming from outside the state. We're working closely with our local legislative delegation and with the lobbyists because that's a tremendous amount of resource being left on the table. The discussion in Jeff City looks a lot like this. There's a more heightened sense of awareness now because of the COVID-19 pandemic and realizing the revenue shortfalls that everybody's facing because people are just primarily shopping from home now since they can't get out to the stores as much. There is an element in Jefferson City that would like to see some sort of a trade-off here in the form of a revenue offset. So believing that if a new tax is added, some other tax should be taken away. And that's for the folks in Jeff City to decide, but that's really where the crux of the conversation is at right now. Whether or not to approve it and whether or not a revenue offset should be as part of this and what that might be. They've got between now and Friday at 6 to get it figured out, unless a special session were to be called to deal with this.
Well, as we move forward into the future, I mean, how we retrieve funding sources is going to change dramatically. We've been talking about this for years now, and I think the fruit of our discussions has hit with the COVID-19 that with nobody able to purchase and go out into the brick and mortars that we need this legislation more than ever, for sure. With the changing of departments, Mr. City Manager, with moving into the formation of the Municipal Service Department, the concern that I have here, and I understand we're thinking out of the box and we want to do things different, which we should, how do we not commingle general fund revenues and enterprise fund revenues with that? What kind of safeguards do we have there that those aren't being commingled?
Yeah, and great question. we've got the sales tax oversight committees that oversee the stormwater sales tax, and that will continue to meet and convene and provide that same level of oversight. We've, of course, got the Public Utilities Oversight Board, which will continue to meet and convene and provide for that oversight, reviewing the financials. I think our benchmark here and our proof in the pudding, if you will, was the merger a few years ago with Parks and Recreation, and then bringing in the Tourism Department. So there for a while, the Parks Department was managing the general fund resources, the park sales tax fund, and then the transient guest tax fund. So 3 different funds there as well. And then just utilizing those citizen oversight boards to make sure, and of course in our annual financial audit, which I know you are part of the committee that has spent a significant amount of time reviewing that the last few weeks. Those are the various checks and balances and safeguards that are in place to make sure that funds are not commingled and spent in accordance with the restrictions that are placed upon them.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Yeah, we've spent close to 5 hours, I believe, Councilwoman DeLucia on Scott on the Audit and Finance Committee and city staff to help us navigate and kind of work through this. This is budget time is always a tough time. You throw in a pandemic on top of that and get some long hours and some funding that you really don't want to see and don't want to do, but sometimes we have to make those tough decisions. So, Mr. City Manager, I want to say thank you to your staff and everybody who's put time into building this budget that we have here that we need to take consideration. And also, is it tomorrow that you're having the community discussion, Mr. City Manager, with our city employees?
Yeah, so the last few years we have done a budget town hall for our city employees. So we're doing that at noon tomorrow, and we've sent them an invitation to do a virtual meeting like this and asked them today to go ahead and send in questions so we could provide answers in advance for those questions. And then, great reminder there, council member, we also have Wednesday evening, the budget town hall that we've done for the public the last few years. Again, in a weird time, but we're going to do that virtually as well. Go to our social media pages or city website for the details of how to access that, and also send in. That's going to be a Facebook Live event, so we'll be getting questions for that as well out there for the public.
Well, definitely thank you for your time and putting forth the transparency on working through this budget. Sometimes it's tough to read even for us who have looked at these before, but sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Indeed.
Councilman DeLucia?
Thank you very much. Nothing, thank you.
Okay. If you would turn off your mic.
Sorry about that.
Nobody's disputing, and we certainly need the transit availability. Making up shortfalls at this time is not addressing the issue. We have a product that we're unable to sustain, I believe, with higher rates. It's a lot like our local newspaper who had to cut out a day. Whereas we know we have the obligation and that these people depend on this, how to best do it for the future, not just the momentary put out the fire. We will come to some sort of agreement on how to do that. But the overall issue is that we have a product that is not sustainable without help or other income to put towards that. And I think that's the future question. Mr. City Manager, I know that you brought forth bringing the routes. Is that still on the agenda?
Yeah, the elimination of the fixed route there, all that conversation's on the table though about how and alternative services, additional revenues from the ATA through their resources, modifying the existing routes that we have to better align with where the need and the demand is at. I would say a very holistic look is going to be undertaken on this thing. And I would suspect that what the proposed budget looks like is not what the adopted budget's going to look like on this.
Councilman Roberson?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that the bus routes have never made money. They're not meant to make money. It's just like the police department. It's not meant to make money. It's a basic service that the city provides. And so it provides that service to the least of those that can afford it. And so even though the cost may go up a little bit, it hasn't gone up significantly like a lot of the other services that we provide, for instance, police. So yes, we can afford it. We have elected to cut it from the budget because of the budgetary problems. We need to find a way to fund it. That's what I think. I think we need to find a way to fund it because it's a basic service the city needs to provide for a segment of our population that has no other choice for transportation. And it's just like the soup kitchens, just like the food pantries that hand out food. We've got to be there to help with transportation because we have no other mass transit in the city. That's the only option. Thanks.
Nobody's arguing that it's there and why it is. What they're suggesting is that it's not sustainable under these conditions. It's not that we're going to give it up. It's that the problem is not being met. And there's other people who have said that they were going to help on many occasions. And I think we have to bring that forth a little more strongly. Councilman Perkins?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Like I say, Mayor Weir and I, we've reached out, we've talked, we've had some good conversations with Mr. McIntyre. As far as I know, we are the only two elected officials that have done so. I would strongly reach out and talk to him about the funding sources that they have that we can work as a partnership. If we can bring a partnership to this, that's the way to go. But it needs to, we need to have a full court press with our council here, with my colleagues, to reach out to them. And I would encourage you to do so.
Now, I've talked to Robbie a lot. We've had several discussions, and we were promised 2 policemen and some other things that didn't come to fruition. But this is why we're having this. It's not to stop it. It's to find a way to handle it that we can afford. It doesn't mean that we're stopping anything. And for people to raise that alarm is, well, not right. Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned. Becky?